Christians are being hunted down and massacred across Syria. Did you know that? Are you aware of this story? Probably not, because the mainstream media won't cover this story for some reason. I don't know why. This is happening around the world, but right now in Syria, it is most acute. Over the weekend, 1 hour after this church service, look at these little kids carrying up the candles on the staff here. These little kids, one of them carrying the cross. All of these folks here in this church service at St. Elias Church in Damascus. So this was 1 hour prior to this church being attacked and massacred. 30 people killed inside of this church.
Dozens injured, dozens in the first ISIS-style bombing since Syria has toppled and been ruled by former ISIS leader.
Syrian journalist Kevork Almasian, he himself a practicing Christian Orthodox, is joining us now to analyze this. So, Kevork, this is not just an isolated incident. I mean, I don't know why the mainstream media around the world, they're just ignoring this story, Christians being hunted down. But this isn't just an isolated incident, is it?
Thank you very much, Clayton and Natali, for having me. At the introduction, you mentioned that the mainstream media doesn't cover this case because, for a simple reason, for 14 years, they promoted for this outcome. They promoted for a regime change, and they promoted for the chaos which was unleashed after the regime change in the country. So they don't want to hold themselves responsibility, and they don't want to tell their audience that they have lied to their audience about the nature of the conflict in the country. Now, this type of attacks were anticipated since the regime change happened. And even before that, for 14 years, the Christians came under attacks, targeted attacks by the Al-Qaeda forces in the country, backed, sponsored, funded, and trained by different regional intelligence apparatuses and also the CIA, which played a major role in this. And this led into driving 90% of the Christians out of Syria. Now, in the neighboring countries of Syria, such as in Jordan, in Lebanon, and in Turkey, Western NGOs established offices there saying that we are here to save the Christians from persecution. So what they do, basically, they drove the Christians to the neighboring countries, and from the neighboring countries, they absorbed them into some of the Western countries, such as in Australia and in Canada. But this was some sort of, in my opinion, a soft ethnic cleansing of the Christians after unleashing this type of brutal war in the country. Now that only 10% of the Christians left in the country, now we're witnessing another type of targeted attacks against them after they came after the Alawites, the Kurds, the Druze. Now they're coming after the Christians. So sending suicide bombers into a church, blowing it up completely, killing the worshippers there. And this act of intimidation, of course, only aims at driving the rest of the Christians out of Syria, because the ideology that Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, who is now the self-selected president of Syria, goes back at least 800 years from now. And he believes in the teachings of Ibn Taymiyyah. And Ibn Taymiyyah believes that first, this Al-Qaeda ideology, people should purify their own domestic house from the minority Islamic sects. And when they are done with them, they have to come after the Christians, after the Jews, and after other religions. So this is just a logical, in my opinion, development, what is happening in the country after installing a person who personally believes in this. And the evidence and the proof of it is when the terrorist attack happened and 30 people were killed inside the church, Jolani issued a statement. And he said he expresses solidarity with the victims of these attacks, and he called the attack a criminal explosion. Now, this is different from a previous administration in Syria, which used to call such attacks terrorist attack. So Jolani doesn't even dare to call an attack against the Christian community in the country a terrorist attack, because he himself administered and he sponsored this type of attacks in Iraq. He was the one who used to build car bombs and send them into the Shia communities, into the Christian neighborhoods, and blow them up in their neighborhoods. Now that he's the president of the country, he cannot just walk back and say this is a terrorist attack, while he did the same thing 20 years ago in Iraq in order to start a civil war there.
But again, he said that was just a phase, you know, like when I had bangs. Exactly.
He reformed.
Yes. And back in March, we discussed the 900 Alawite civilians who were massacred under his watch. And he released this statement that he announced the formation of a fact-finding committee regarding these events. What happened when I asked you about this? You gave us a guttural laugh. That was your response to it. So is there anything that came of this fact finding other than it's happening?
Actually, the numbers exceed the 10,000 Alawites who were slaughtered by his regime. And he formed a committee saying that he will investigate the case. And he gave 3 months for the committee to conclude the investigation. After 3 months, he extended it another 3 months. So we are now in the 5th month and nothing came out yet, which means when you are the ruler of a country and you're giving time after time after time for militants to commit such atrocities, you're basically tacitly and openly, you're encouraging them to continue this type of atrocities against the religious and ethnic minorities in the country. Nowadays, I receive daily messages and phone calls from friends, colleagues, family in Syria. They're all desperate. They don't know what to do. And most of the people who are stuck now in the country, they are from the poorer classes in the country. They don't have any means to leave the country and go, let's say, to another place or to relocate or pay a smuggler to come to Europe. And ironically enough, if you remember the big refugee crisis in Europe in 2015 and 2016, and back then all European countries opened their doors. And now where are the European countries from the Christians of Syria? Why aren't they receiving refugees or give them any protection after now that they are the ones targeted by these terrorist attacks? We don't see any politician in Europe or in the West talking about it. We don't see the mainstream media is talking about it. But I personally urge at least Greece and other countries who have an invested interest in the Greek Orthodox community in the country to at least give them temporary protection in their own countries before the situation gets better. Because from the current moment, from what I see, what is happening in the country, that there is a persistent attempt to cleanse the country from the infidels and from those who call them like they have deviated from the rules of God. Therefore, the Christians who don't have any militias to protect themselves, they don't have any political power, they don't have a political party, and they don't have any regional power on their back, they are left alone in the country. They have no one basically to back them, support them, and assist them in the security, because trusting Jolani in this case is very delusional and it's very dangerous, because he's the same guy who is sending cars to the Christian neighborhoods, and they put big microphones and big speakers and calling the Christians to convert to Islam or to their ideology. And after all these incidences happening and provocations against the Christians, now that it ended up with a terrorist attack, now Christians going to the streets and calling for justice, and they're protesting against the Jolani regime. But be sure that this type of protests will lead to further persecution and prosecution of the Christians in Syria, because Jolani is not tolerant towards such, this type of, for example, protests against Jolani, because they say we reject this type of terrorism and we reject the foreign fighters. Clayton and Natali, you know that we have thousands and thousands and thousands of multinational Takfiri terrorists in Syria, and when the Syrian regime was asked, what are you going to do about them? They said, they helped us in the revolution, so we have to settle them in the country. And he wants to give them Syrian citizenship, and he has given them senior positions in the Syrian army. So we have people from Chechnya, we have people from Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, we have people from Pakistan, and one of the suicide bombers was from Pakistan, who blew up himself in a Syrian church. And President Trump, he agreed on this plan, because otherwise, what are they going to do with these thousands of jihadists in Syria if they're going to send them back to their own countries or probably relocate them to other places? These people are very anarchic, they are very terroristic, they are very radical. Wherever they go, they could wreak havoc. Therefore, they decided to settle them in Syria, give them Syrian citizenship, and let everyone forget about it. And now these multinational Takfiris are blowing themselves up among the Christian communities.
Take a look at this headline from DW.com. Attack on Christians. And again, this is just how the mainstream media portrays this. Attack on Christians threatens Syria's post-war cohesion. And I'll read you the byline, which says, Syria's new president has promised to replace the Assad dictatorship with a multi-religious society where all faiths are represented. Sunday's terror attack in Damascus shows us how much work remains to be done. So the mainstream media is, of course, spinning at the, Syria's new president has promised to replace the Assad dictatorship with a multi-religious society. It's going to be a utopia.
Who funds this outlet? Who funds this outlet, Clayton? Is the German government. This is not even an independent outlet. They are funded by the Foreign Ministry of Germany, and they tell them exactly how to report about these cases. And one of the first European foreign ministers who flew to Damascus trying to shake hands with Jolani was the former foreign minister of Germany, Annalena Baerbock, whose ministry funds this outlet. Now that she's out of power, it's still the same. Faces change, but similar people come to power, and they're still funding this type of mainstream media outlets, and they're trying to create a perception that there is a chance, let's give him a chance. What is he going to do? The truth of the matter is they accepted Jolani because he said, I will not attack Israel. I will break the axis of resistance. I will seal the borders with Hezbollah. I will make life easier for Israel in the region, and I will normalize ties with them. I will condemn Iran, and I will not condemn Israel. So everybody was excited about him when he came to power. And that's what he's basically doing. He is reorienting the geopolitical posture of Syria, let's say, from pro-Russia, pro-Iran, pro-BRICS into pro-NATO and pro-WEF position, for example. And accordingly, everybody accepted him. If he kills all the Christians in Syria, there is no problem about that. Who is shedding crocodile tears now on the Christians in Iraq? 90% of them were also driven out of their country after the 2003 war. And nobody speaks about them now after 20 years. And similar thing will happen to the Syrian Christians in 10 years and 20 years. Everybody will forget about them because other countries will absorb these Christians into their countries. And the story is done. And the goal of the regime change war has been materialized. This is the main issue. It is about geopolitics and finances and money, and it has nothing to do about human rights. If Jolani is committing atrocities or violating human rights, it's okay. He's their ally.
Now, so what next? Because in the past, we've talked about, Syrians were protected under Assad, and you and I kind of felt like, well, if the United States gets out of Syria, that was sort of the way of things. But now the United States is saying, well, with Jolani, we're going to sort of put a lease on it, like make it so it was always okay and it's in arrears. And so then it seems like that's just going to be the way it is. The United States will keep a small presence there. Jolani's going to stay. I don't see any, what's going to happen? I don't see any let's hope for this at all.
Yeah. The U.S. Army is finalizing a long-term deal with Jolani to stay in the country permanently for a long time. They want to stay in the eastern shore of the Euphrates, where most of the oil and the gas is, because American companies are going to extract this oil, process them, recycle them, and sell them, of course. So it's a big profit for them, and the American soldiers, boots on the ground, are going to be protectors, basically, of these oil fields, and their proxies, the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces there, because what the Americans want to do is to create spheres of influence in the country on the eastern shore of the Euphrates, which is 1/3 of the country, where the American occupation forces are located. They are going to receive now a legitimacy from the current regime in Damascus, so they stay there for the sake of the oil and the gas. And the rest of the country can screw itself because they don't have much of natural resources. They don't have the food basket. They don't have the carbohydrates. They can just continue living under Jolani. And this is where Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, basically, they are endorsing this Jolani rule because he's the one who is going to make the shift. This is a historic shift. Since World War II, since the end of World War II, and since the independence of Syria, we have had over probably 13 or 14 different presidents and leaders in the country, and none of them succeeded or managed or wanted to reorient Syria on the side of the transatlantic alliance. And this is what Jolani was tasked to do, and that is why they accepted him to come to power. And this is great news for the transatlantic movement in alliance in the Middle East, because now that with this conflict between Iran, a war between Iran and Israel, they have now an open airspace over Syria. Therefore, the Israeli forces can fly over the Syrian airspace and bomb Iran on the borders with Iraq. Before that, under Assad, he closed his airspace, and since 2018, the Israeli fighter jets didn't dare to penetrate the Syrian airspace because of the complicated and sophisticated Syrian airspace. But once Jolani came to power, Israel destroyed all the air defenses of Syria, and Jolani basically inherited the militia. He doesn't have any army, he doesn't have tanks, he doesn't have artilleries or air force or air defenses. Therefore, they have given him, let's say, you know how Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank rules. He's like he has a militia and he has a police station there. This is how he's ruling over the neck of the Syrians, basically, who are unarmed, and they don't have any protection from anyone. That's why the future is very, very, very dire. And we're speaking about Syria. We're speaking about Palestine. Those places are the birthplace of Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ walked through the streets of this neighborhood. And therefore, it has a very big historical and cultural and religious significance, something that if it's wiped out from Syria, it could also lead into another domino effect to other regions, to countries that their leaders claim that they're Christians. So if you're a Christian and if you care about the future of Christianity, you should not only just make noise about the victims. No, we have to lobby and pressure against this type of catastrophic policies coming from whether Washington or Tel Aviv, regime change, destruction, chaos, and then create a vacuum for these ISIS and Al-Qaeda types to take over, just like they did in Iraq. And now they wanted to copy it in Iran. But in Iran, they say, no, it's different in Iran. This time is different in Iran. It's not going to be like in Syria or in Iraq. But I would say it would be worse, because 92 million people live in Iran. And there are multiple different ethnic and religious groups in Iran. So if you create a power vacuum, and if there is a mistrust or there is a security event in the country, everybody will start protecting itself, carrying arms, fighting against each other. So how many refugees could create this out of 92 million people, to all these influencers in the United States who say, we don't want refugees, we don't want migrants, but every time there are the drums of war, they join it and they want to attack another country. And they create the same problems that they say that they don't want to face or address in their own countries. That's ridiculous, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's shocking when we go in and destabilize a country like Somalia, and then suddenly we wind up with all kinds of Somalian refugees, or Iraq. Then we have all sorts of Iraqi refugees. It's amazing how that happens, and they pour into our country. You Christians are under attack. I mean, I saw a study today, 1 out of every 7 basically being persecuted around the world right now. And the story, for whatever reason, just not getting any coverage in the mainstream media. So you have to come to alternative media like what Kevork does at Syriana Analysis, or what we do here at Redacted. So Kevork, thank you so much for your courage. Thank you for your brilliance. One of the few, really one of the great Syrian voices that we can turn to get the truth about this. Thank you, Kevork. Great to see you as always.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for shedding light on this. You were one of the very few journalists with big platforms who continuously speaking about Syria. It's very important, in my opinion, for the journalists to speak about such cases.
Well, yes, we believe so. Thank you so much, Kevork. Absolutely.
Thank you.